I saw my mother leaving a motel with my fiancé, and when I confronted both of them, she said she was protecting me by finding out if he really loved me. 2 days later, I discovered it wasn't the first time. Rain fell like tears from the sky on a gray Thursday afternoon, and I was driving through the wet streets of the city heading home after a tiring meeting at the office where I had worked as an architect for 5 years. My 32 years had always been marked by an organized and planned life, where each decision was carefully thought out before being executed. Perhaps that's why it took me so long to accept Daniel's marriage proposal, my boyfriend of 3 years and fiancé for 6 months. The wedding was scheduled for December, just 2 months away, and I still felt that flutter in my stomach that every bride feels when thinking about the responsibility of building a family. Daniel was a 35-year-old man, a successful civil engineer, with that charming smile that won me over from our first meeting at a cafe near my workplace. He was everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner: intelligent, caring, ambitious, and especially someone who respected my independence and professional dreams without trying to diminish me. My mother, Marcia, had always shown approval of our relationship, constantly praising his qualities and encouraging me to not let a man like that slip away, as she used to say in that maternal tone that mixed affection with concern about my romantic future. At 55, my mother was still a beautiful woman who took care of her appearance with almost obsessive dedication, regularly attending the gym, getting aesthetic treatments, and always impeccably dressed even for simple daily activities. Since her separation from my father 10 years ago, she had become closer to me, sometimes in a way that suffocated me a bit, but which I interpreted as excessive maternal love from a woman who had lost her husband and didn't want to lose her daughter too. On that rainy afternoon, I was passing through the main avenue when I decided to make a quick stop at the pharmacy to buy some medicine I had forgotten to get during lunch. The pharmacy was on a busy corner, near several commercial establishments, including a small, discreet motel that I always noticed but never paid much attention to. It was the type of place that was part of the urban landscape without arousing particular curiosity. I parked the car in front of the pharmacy and ran through the light rain, my low-heeled shoes making small noises against the wet asphalt. I quickly bought what I needed, exchanging a few polite words with the pharmacist about the rainy weather, and returned to the car shaking my head to remove the drops of water that had accumulated in my brown hair. It was when I was putting the key in the ignition that my eyes automatically turned to the motel across the street, more out of habit than real interest. And it was at that moment that my world completely collapsed, like a building being imploded in slow motion. Coming out of the main door of the motel, walking side by side with disturbing naturalness, were two figures I would recognize anywhere in the world, even in the rain and even from a distance: my mother, Marcia, and my fiancé, Daniel. They weren't just leaving the same place by coincidence. They were clearly together, walking with an intimacy that made my stomach violently turn. My mother held his arm affectionately as they spoke softly, their bodies too close to be anything innocent. The initial shock left me completely paralyzed inside the car, as if my brain refused to process what my eyes were clearly seeing. For some unbearable seconds, I thought I might be having a hallucination caused by work stress or wedding preparations, that perhaps it was just a strange coincidence that could be rationally explained. But when I saw Daniel gently kiss my mother's forehead before they separated to go to their respective cars, the brutal reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the stomach. My breathing became labored, my heart started beating irregularly, and I felt a wave of simultaneous heat and cold running through my entire body. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the steering wheel, and for a moment I thought I might faint right there, in the driver's seat, watching the greatest betrayal of my life unfold before my eyes. Daniel got into his black car, an imported sedan that I knew as well as my own vehicle, while my mother headed to her small red hatchback that I had helped her choose the previous year. They didn't notice my presence, too absorbed in their intimate farewell to realize they were being observed by the person who loved them most in the world. Or at least that's what I believed until a few seconds ago. The rain continued falling, creating a liquid curtain that blurred the windshield, but couldn't hide the devastating clarity of what I had witnessed. My brain desperately tried to find alternative explanations, anything that could transform that scene into a misunderstanding, but my heart already knew the painful truth that my mind refused to accept. I sat in the car for over 20 minutes, watching the rain run down the glass while trying to regain control of my emotions and decide what my next step would be. It felt like living a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, where the two most important people in my life, my mother and my future husband, had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. My mind worked frantically, reviewing every recent conversation, every gesture, every moment that might have indicated something was happening behind my back. I remembered how Daniel had become closer to my family in recent months, visiting my mother alone when I was working, offering to help her with small house repairs, showing a solicitude that I interpreted as the affection of a dedicated son-in-law. My mother had also subtly changed, talking more about Daniel than usual, constantly praising him, and even suggesting that I should be more affectionate with him because good men are rare and need to be valued. Now, these memories took on a completely different and sinister meaning, like pieces of a macabre puzzle that finally fit together to form a repulsive image. Tears began streaming down my face, mixing with the moisture that had entered the car when I ran from the pharmacy. These weren't tears of ordinary sadness, but of a deep and devastating pain that seemed to tear my soul apart, a combination of betrayal, disbelief, and the terrible realization that my entire life had been built on lies. How could they do this to me? How could they look me in the eyes every day pretending they loved me while maintaining this secret relationship? I questioned aloud, my voice echoing in the silent interior of the vehicle. Finally, I found the strength to start the car and drive home, but throughout the journey, my mind was divided between growing anger and the desperate need to confront them both immediately. The afternoon traffic seemed slower than usual, each red light an eternity of suffering where I mentally rehearsed the words I would say, the questions I would ask, the accusations I would scream. My house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, an area I had chosen precisely for the peace it offered after busy workdays. But at that moment, not even the familiarity of my home could bring me the comfort I desperately needed. I parked in the garage with mechanical movements, like a robot executing a program, and entered through the back door that led directly into the kitchen. The house was silent and cold, exactly how my heart felt at that moment. I threw my keys on the marble countertop with more force than necessary, the metallic noise echoing off the walls like a scream of frustration. I picked up my cell phone with hands that were still slightly trembling and hesitated for a few seconds before dialing Daniel's number. I needed to hear him lie, needed to give him the opportunity to hang himself with his own false words. The phone rang 4 times before he answered with his familiar voice, that same voice that used to calm me during nightmares and now made me feel nauseous. "Hi, honey. How was your day at the office?" he asked with frightening naturalness, as if he hadn't just left a motel with my mother less than an hour ago. "Daniel, we need to talk urgently," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotional storm happening inside me. "Can you come to my house now?" He hesitated for a second, perhaps detecting something different in my tone, before answering, "Of course, dear. Did something happen? You sound strange." "You'll understand when you get here," I said coldly, hanging up the phone before he could ask more questions. While waiting for Daniel to arrive, I called my mother, and the sound of her sweet maternal voice on the other end made me feel a contradictory mixture of filial love and absolute disgust. "Hi, daughter. What a surprise to get your call at this time. How are you, my love?" she said with that affectionate tone that always calmed me down, but now sounded like a hypocritical mask covering her true face. "Mom, I need you to come to my house too now," I replied, struggling not to burst into accusations immediately. "Something serious has happened. It's about Daniel and our marriage." I can swear I heard her breath falter on the other end of the line, a revealing silence that lasted 3 or 4 seconds before she regained her composure. "My goodness, daughter, you scared me. Of course I'll come over. It must be some problem with the preparations. These things always cause stress for engaged couples," she said, trying to sound reassuring but failing miserably. Her voice had subtly changed, taking on a forced quality that confirmed my suspicions about her guilt. "It's not about preparations, Mom. It's about fidelity and trust," I replied with a harshness that even surprised myself. "Come quickly because we have a lot to clarify." I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the living room, observing the decoration I had chosen with such care. The colorful cushions on the sofa, the family photographs on the shelves, the painting Daniel had given me on our first dating anniversary. Everything seemed contaminated now, as if their betrayal had infected every corner of my home, every happy memory, every future plan we had built together. Daniel arrived first, in about 15 minutes, using his key to enter as he always did since we got engaged. He appeared in the living room carrying a small bouquet of red roses, my favorite flowers, probably purchased at the gas station florist where he always stopped on the way to my house. Seeing those flowers made me feel a bitter irony, because they represented the love I thought we had, but that now revealed itself as a cruel farce. brought your favorite flowers to brighten your day," he said with that charming smile that had won me over 3 years ago, approaching to kiss me as he always did upon arrival. But I abruptly moved away, stepping back and staring at him with an intensity that made his smile immediately disappear. "Isabella, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked, his voice showing genuine concern, or convincing acting. He placed the flowers on the center table and tried to approach again, but I maintained the physical distance between us as if it were a protective barrier. "Daniel, I want you to look me in the eyes and answer with absolute honesty. Where were you this afternoon?" I asked, crossing my arms and staring at him fixedly. I could see a shadow of nervousness pass over his face, his eyes shifting slightly before returning to mine. "I was resolving some issues at the bank, and then I went to the office until now." "Why this strange question, love?" he replied, his voice sounding too rehearsed to be convincing. At that moment, I heard the familiar sound of my mother's car parking in the driveway, and my stomach contracted anticipating the confrontation that was about to happen. "Because my mother is also going to answer the same question," I said coldly, "and we'll see if your versions match." My mother entered through the front door using her own key, as she always did since I had moved to that house 2 years ago. She appeared in the living room wearing the same elegant outfit she was wearing at the motel, a blue silk blouse and black dress pants that enhanced her still attractive figure for a 55-year-old woman. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged despite the rain, and her flawless makeup showed no signs that she had spent the afternoon in an activity that should have left her disheveled. "Hi, daughter. Hi, Daniel. How good that you're both here," she said with a radiant smile that made me feel like vomiting. She greeted Daniel with a little kiss on the cheek, an apparently innocent gesture that now seemed to me loaded with secret intimacy and criminal complicity. "Mom, sit down," I ordered, pointing to the armchair across from the sofa where Daniel had seated himself. "I need to ask you both a question, and I want honest answers." I observed how they exchanged a quick but significant look, a silent communication confirming that there were secrets between them that I didn't know about. Daniel was visibly nervous, his restless hands fidgeting with the fabric of his pants, while my mother maintained her elegant posture, but her eyes suspiciously avoided mine. "Were you two together this afternoon?" I asked directly, watching their reactions with detective-like attention. The silence that followed was deafening, loaded with guilt and unspoken lies. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice slightly trembling. "Isabella, what are you talking about?" "I already told you where I was today." But my mother remained silent longer, her eyes finally meeting mine with an expression that mixed defiance and fear. "Daughter, why these strange questions? Did something happen?" she asked, trying to reverse the situation and put me on the defensive. It was at that moment that I decided to end the lies and confront them with the brutal truth I had witnessed. "I saw you two leaving the motel on the main avenue an hour ago," I declared firmly, observing how the color drained from both their faces simultaneously. The impact of my revelation was immediate and devastating. Daniel became visibly pale, his hands began to tremble slightly, and he opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came out. My mother, on the other hand, tried to maintain her composure, but I could see her eyes widening in shock before she quickly tried to assume an expression of false indignation. "Isabella, how can you insinuate such a thing? You must have been confused, seen other people who looked like us," she said, rising from the armchair with dramatic gestures. But her performance was terrible, too transparent to convince anyone. Daniel finally found his voice, but his words came out stuttered and desperate. "Isabella, I can explain. It's not what you're thinking. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I exploded, my voice echoing through the room. "You two coming out of a motel together, Daniel lovingly kissing my mother's forehead. What kind of misunderstanding would that be?" Tears of anger began to stream down my face, but my voice remained firm and accusatory. "How long have you been having an affair? How long have you been betraying me behind my back, laughing at me, making plans for after my wedding?" The questions came out like bullets from a machine gun, each one hitting its targets and making them emotionally retreat. My mother was the first to try a different strategy, approaching me with a pleading expression and choked voice. "Daughter, please let me explain. It's not what you're thinking. I swear by everything sacred," she said, trying to hold my hands. But I pulled away abruptly as if her touch were poisonous. "I was trying to protect you, finding out if Daniel really truly loves you." The explanation burst from her mouth like a bomb, leaving me temporarily speechless at the absurdity of the justification. Daniel looked at her with an expression of surprise and panic, clearly not expecting her to use this line of defense. Protect me? Protect me? I repeated slowly, my voice loaded with incredulity. Are you telling me you went to a motel with my fiancé to protect me? The situation was becoming more surreal by the second, as if I were participating in a play where the actors had completely lost control of the script. My mother nodded vigorously, tears, fake or genuine, I could no longer discern, beginning to stream down her carefully made up cheeks. Yes, daughter. I noticed that Daniel had been acting strange lately, more distant, and I was afraid he might cheat on you after the wedding. So I decided to test him, to see if he would be capable of cheating on you with your own mother. In law. The twisted logic of her explanation made me feel as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss. Daniel tried to compliment her version, his voice desperate. Isabella, that's exactly it. Your mother approached me with this crazy story, and I thought if I went along, she would understand that I truly love you and would stop with these suspicions. I remained silent for a few minutes, processing the absurd explanations they were trying to push on me, feeling a mixture of anger, disgust, and a deep sadness that seemed to corrode my soul from within. Their creativity for inventing justifications was impressive, but it also revealed how much they considered me stupid and naive to believe in a story so clearly made up on the spot. Do you really think I'm going to believe this ridiculous story? I asked in a low voice, but loaded with threat. You went to a motel to talk about fidelity? To do a loyalty test? My voice gradually rose until it became a cry of indignation. Do you think I'm completely idiotic? The echo of my explosion reverberated through the house, and I saw both of them physically recoil before my fury. Daniel tried to approach again, his hands extended in a pleading gesture. Isabella, please, calm down and let's talk rationally. But I was beyond rationality at that moment, consumed by the double betrayal I had discovered. Don't come near me, I shouted, pointing my finger at him. Don't you dare touch me with the same hands that touched my mother. The words came out loaded with a visceral disgust that made Daniel stop mid-movement. My mother tried a new approach, her voice assuming a manipulative maternal tone that she always used when she wanted to convince me of something. Daughter, you're being very dramatic. We did this thinking of your well-being, but her words only intensified my anger. Thinking of my well-being? I exploded again. Two people I trusted most in the world betraying me is for my own good? The tension in the room had reached an unbearable level, as if the air was charged with electricity before a devastating storm. I took several deep breaths, trying to regain some control over my emotions to make rational decisions instead of just reacting to the pain. I want both of you to leave my house now, I declared in a firm voice, pointing to the door. I want you to leave and never come back. Daniel tried to protest once more, his voice taking on a pathetic and pleading tone. Isabella, please, you can't end our relationship based on a misunderstanding. We're getting married in 2 months. But I brutally interrupted him. Marriage? What marriage, Daniel? Do you think I'm going to marry a man who cheated with my own mother? I took the engagement ring, a diamond solitaire that had cost him 3 monthly salaries, and violently removed it from my finger, throwing it on the living room floor where it rolled until stopping near his feet. The sound of metal hitting the wooden floor was like a final verdict, sealing the end of 3 years of relationship and 2 months of wedding preparations. My mother made one more desperate attempt to reverse the situation. Daughter, you'll regret making this decision in the heat of the moment. When you calm down, you'll understand that we did everything out of love. Out of love? I screamed, my voice breaking with emotion. You destroyed my life out of love? You betrayed me in the worst possible way out of love? Tears of anger and sadness flowed freely down my face, but my determination remained unshakable. Get out of here now before I call the police. The threat, although it couldn't legally be carried out, had the desired effect. Both headed for the door with defeated expressions and dragging steps. After they left, the house was enveloped in an oppressive silence that seemed to amplify every beat of my racing heart. I collapsed on the sofa, hugging a cushion against my chest as if it were a protective shield against the overwhelming pain that took over my entire being. The tears flowed uncontrollably, not just tears of sadness, but of a deep anger mixed with a feeling of betrayal that seemed to tear my soul to pieces. I looked at the engagement ring still on the floor, ironically shining under the chandelier light, and felt an almost uncontrollable urge to step on it until completely destroying it. For the next 3 hours, I remained in that same position, alternating between crying fits and moments of silent rage, where my mind worked frantically trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal I had discovered. With each passing minute, more suspicious details from the past months came back to my memory with painful clarity. How Daniel always offered to take my mother to the doctor when I was working. How they whispered when they thought I wasn't paying attention. How my mother always excessively praised his physical qualities. How he knew details about her life that I had never mentioned. All these small signs that I had ignored or interpreted as family affection now revealed themselves as evidence of a clandestine relationship that probably had lasted for months. How could I have been so blind? How did I not notice what was happening right under my nose? I questioned myself out loud, my voice echoing through the empty room. The feeling of humiliation was almost as intense as that of betrayal. Not only had I been deceived, but I had been deceived so obviously that I felt like a complete idiot for not having realized it sooner. The next day, Friday, I woke up with swollen eyes from crying so much, and a headache that felt like it was splitting my skull in half. I had slept on the living room sofa, wearing the same clothes as the day before, because I couldn't find the strength to go up to my bedroom. The first thing I did was call my best friend, Fernanda, an architect like me who worked at a competing firm and had been my confidant for over 10 years. Fernanda answered the phone with her usual cheerful voice, but became immediately concerned when she heard my defeated tone. "Isabella, what happened? Your voice sounds terrible. You sound like you've been run over by a truck," she said with her typical honesty that always made me smile. But today couldn't even draw a hint of a smile from my face. I told her the whole story, from the moment I saw my mother and Daniel leaving the motel to the devastating confrontation of the previous night, and I could hear her making exclamations of shock and indignation on the other end of the line. "My God, Isabella, I always thought your mother was a bit strange regarding Daniel, but I never imagined she would go this far," she said when I finished my account. "And what's this story about protecting you? What kind of mother does this to her own daughter?" The indignation in Fernanda's voice did me good, because it confirmed that I wasn't being dramatic or exaggerated in my reaction. "Fernanda, I need to know how long this has been going on," I said, my voice gaining determination. "I need to find out if it was just once or if they've been deceiving me for months. Can you help me investigate?" Fernanda didn't hesitate for even a second. "Of course I'll help you. I'll cancel my commitments today and we'll go after the truth. But first, you need to take a shower, eat something, and get dressed. You can't face this situation looking like a defeated person." I followed Fernanda's advice and took a hot shower that lasted almost an hour, letting the water wash away not just the physical dirt, but symbolically all the emotional contamination of the betrayal. I wore comfortable but elegant clothes, dark jeans and a simple white blouse, and ate some toast with coffee, forcing the food down despite the knot I felt in my throat. Fernanda arrived at my house around 10 in the morning, carrying a folder of documents and a determined expression that immediately reassured me. At 31, Fernanda was a practical and objective woman, with curly hair always tied in a functional bun and a personality that mixed maternal affection with professional efficiency. "The first thing we're going to do is hire a private detective to investigate how long this has been going on," she announced, opening the folder on my dining table. "I know someone who works with matrimonial investigations, a discreet and competent professional who has already helped some clients from my office." The idea of hiring a detective to investigate my own family seemed surreal to me, as if I were living in a film noir instead of my real life. But I knew Fernanda was right. "I need concrete evidence, not just of what I saw yesterday, but of the entire history of this betrayal," I agreed, feeling a cold determination settling in place of the overwhelming pain. If I'm going to destroy my life because of this, at least I'll be absolutely certain that I'm making the right decision. Fernanda took her phone and called the investigator, briefly explaining the situation and scheduling a meeting for that same afternoon. "Carlos will see us at 3 o'clock in his office," she said after hanging up. "He's expensive, but worth every penny for the quality of his work." During the hours before the meeting, I tried to keep myself busy organizing papers and canceling the wedding preparations that I had planned with such care. Each call to the suppliers was like a small death: canceling the catering, returning the wedding dress, canceling the church reservation, undoing all the decorations I had chosen with so much love and expectation. The investigator Carlos's office was in a modern commercial building in the city center, a professional and discreet environment that immediately gave me confidence. Carlos was a 45-year-old man with graying hair, intelligent eyes, and a posture that demonstrated years of experience dealing with the darker aspects of human relationships. He received us in a room decorated with understated furniture and shelves filled with legal books, offering coffee and water while inviting me to relate the entire situation from the beginning. "Mrs. Isabella, cases like yours are more common than people imagine," he said after hearing my complete story. "Betrayals involving close family members are usually not isolated events, but patterns of behavior that develop over months or even years." His words confirmed my worst fears, but also gave me validation that my suspicion about the duration of the affair was not paranoia. "I need you to discover everything. When it started, how often they meet, where they usually go if other people know about this," I requested, my voice firm despite the pain I felt talking about the subject. Carlos took a notepad and began asking detailed questions about Daniel and my mother's routines, their free time, places they frequented, behavioral changes I had noticed recently. "I'll need photographs of both. Phone numbers, car license plates, work and residence addresses," he explained methodically. "The work will be discreet and professional, but you need to be prepared to discover things that may be even more painful than what you've already witnessed." Fernanda held my hand when she heard these words, offering silent support while I processed the possibility that the betrayal could be even worse than I imagined. "Mr. Carlos, how long does this type of investigation usually take?" I asked, trying to mentally prepare myself for the period of uncertainty ahead. "Simple cases can be resolved in a week, but more complex investigations can take up to a month," he answered honestly. "It depends on how much evidence we can gather and the complexity of the situation." During the next 3 days, I tried to maintain a normal routine while waiting for the first results of the investigation, but each moment was a struggle against anxiety and the urge to confront my mother and Daniel again. They tried to contact me multiple times. Daniel called at least 10 times a day, sent dozens of desperate text messages, and even showed up at my door one Sunday morning, begging me to let him better explain the situation. My mother was more subtle in her attempts, sending affectionate messages pretending nothing had happened, and inviting me to have lunch together to talk like civilized mother and daughter. I ignored all attempts at communication, blocked their numbers on my phone, and instructed my secretary at the office not to transfer calls from either of them. The pain of betrayal was constant, like an open wound that wouldn't heal, but it was gradually being replaced by a cold, determined anger that gave me strength to move forward with the investigation. At work, I tried to focus on architectural projects, but my productivity had dropped drastically because my mind was constantly worried about what Carlos might discover. My colleagues noticed my change in behavior. I had canceled the wedding without giving detailed explanations, just saying that irreconcilable personal issues came up. But they respected my privacy and didn't ask indiscreet questions. Fernanda visited me daily after work, bringing prepared food and offering the emotional support I desperately needed to not completely fall apart. "Isabella, regardless of what the investigation reveals, you will emerge from this situation stronger," she would say during one of our nightly conversations. "People who betray us like this deserve neither our love nor our presence in their lives." On Wednesday of the following week, Carlos called me requesting an urgent meeting at his office, and the serious tone of his voice made me understand that he had discovered significant information. Fernanda accompanied me again, and during the journey to the city center, I felt my stomach churning with nervousness, anticipating the revelations to come. Carlos received us with a grave expression, having spread across his desk a series of photographs, documents, and detailed notes that evidenced meticulous investigative work. "Mrs. Isabella, I have bad news now," he began straightforwardly. "The relationship between your mother and your fiancé is neither recent nor occasional. My investigation revealed that they have been meeting regularly for at least 8 months. The initial shock was so intense that I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach, taking all the air from my lungs. 8 months meant they had started the affair shortly after my engagement, that all my happiness in recent times had been built on a lie." Carlos continued, showing me photographs that documented several meetings in different places, the same motel where I had caught them, discreet restaurants in distant neighborhoods, even at my own mother's house during hours when I was working. "They meet on average twice a week, always on the same days and times, demonstrating that they've established a consistent routine," he explained, pointing to a detailed spreadsheet with dates and locations. "I also discovered that your mother paid several of Daniel's bills in recent months. His car payments, some expensive purchases, even part of the down payment for the apartment he was financing. The information about my mother financially supporting my ex. Fiancé made me feel an even deeper humiliation, because it meant that not only were they emotionally betraying me, but my own mother was supporting the man who was supposed to become my husband. There's more." Carlos continued, his voice heavy with regret. I obtained recordings of phone conversations where they discuss plans for after your wedding, including a possible separation between you that would financially benefit both of them. The recordings that Carlos played were the final blow to my emotional sanity, because they revealed not just the extent of the betrayal, but also the calculated cruelty with which they had planned to use me. In the first recording, I heard my mother's voice saying, "Daniel, after you two get married, she'll have access to her grandfather's inheritance money, and then we can implement our plan." Daniel's voice responded, "Marcia, I'm sure I can convince her to invest in expanding my business, and when we have the money, we can officially separate and be together." The coldness with which they discussed my future, as if I were just an object to be manipulated for their benefit, made me feel physically nauseated. In the second, more recent recording, my mother was saying, "I'm worried. I think she's suspecting something. Yesterday she asked some strange questions about where I was in the afternoon." Daniel responded, "Relax, Marcia. She's very naive and trusts us too much. Even if she suspects something, she would never imagine it could be this." Hearing them laugh at my supposed naivety, at my trust, made me feel such intense anger that I began to visibly shake. Fernanda, who was sitting beside me, held my hand tightly while tears of indignation ran down my face. "They really think you're stupid," she whispered angrily. "How can two people be so cruel to someone they love?" Carlos turned off the sound equipment and looked at me with professional compassion. "Ms. Isabella, I have all the necessary evidence if you decide to take legal measures against either of them," he said. "Fraud, financial manipulation, emotional damages. There are various legal possibilities depending on what you want to do." At that moment, the pain had completely transformed into a thirst for justice. "Mr. Carlos, I want you to prepare a complete dossier with all this evidence," I declared firmly. "I'm going to publicly confront them with the truth, and then I'll decide what legal measures to take." The final confrontation was carefully planned to cause the maximum possible psychological impact, because I wanted them to feel at least a fraction of the humiliation and pain they had caused me during 8 months of systematic betrayal. I organized a family dinner at my father Roberto's house, inviting not only my mother and Daniel, but also uncles, cousins, and close family friends, a total of 15 people who would witness the revelation of the truth. My father, who had divorced my mother 10 years ago but maintained cordial relations for my sake, was shocked when I explained the situation and immediately offered his house and total support for whatever I needed to do. "Isabella, I always thought your mother was capable of many things, but this exceeded even my worst expectations," he said with genuine indignation. "You can count on me for anything." Roberto was a 58-year-old man, white hair and a calm but firm personality, who had been my emotional safe harbor during my parents' divorce, and who continued to be a stabilizing presence in my life. The choice of his house for the confrontation was strategic. It was neutral territory where I felt protected, and where my mother couldn't control the situation as she usually did. Fernanda helped with the preparations, contacting the guests and explaining that it would be an important family meeting to discuss serious issues related to the cancellation of Isabella's wedding. To my mother and Daniel, it was presented as an attempt at reconciliation, where I would like to clarify some misunderstandings and move forward. They accepted the invitation immediately, probably relieved that I was finally willing to talk about the situation. Carlos prepared a portable sound system to play the recordings, and organized all the photographs and documents in a presentation that would be impossible to deny or question. "Ms. Isabella, when you decide to reveal the evidence, do it in a calm and controlled manner," he advised. "The truth speaks for itself. You don't need to shout or get upset to make an impact." The dinner was scheduled for Saturday night, on a date that was originally when my wedding should have taken place, an irony that didn't go unnoticed by me and added an element of poetic justice to the situation. During the entire week leading up to the event, I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination that kept me awake during the nights, mentally rehearsing the words I would say and imagining the reactions I might encounter. My mother called several times during the week, trying to probe my mood and asking if I was prepared to be reasonable about this whole misunderstood situation. Her attempts to minimize the severity of the betrayal only strengthened my resolution to expose it publicly. Daniel also made some attempts at contact, sending messages saying he was eager to clarify everything and rebuild our trust. The hypocrisy of his words, considering what I knew about his true feelings through the recordings, made me feel deep contempt for his ability to lie so naturally. On Friday night, I met with Fernanda and my father to make the final preparations, defining exactly how the confrontation would happen and what role each would play to support me during the process. "Isabella, make sure you are prepared for the consequences," my father warned with paternal concern. "After this truth comes out, there will be no going back, and you will definitely lose your mother." I looked into his eyes and replied with conviction, "Dad, I already lost my mother the moment she decided to cheat with my fiancé. What I'm doing tomorrow is just making public a reality that already exists." Fernanda nodded in agreement and added, "Roberto, she is making the right choice. People who betray us like this don't deserve to remain in our lives, regardless of blood ties." Saturday came with an overcast sky that seemed to reflect the gravity of what was about to happen, and I spent the entire day preparing myself psychologically for the confrontation that would forever change my family life. I chose to wear an elegant black dress. The color of mourning seemed appropriate to mark the end of my relationship with my mother and ex-fiancé. I arrived at my father's house 2 hours before the other guests to organize the equipment and make final preparations. Carlos had given me an organized folder with all the evidence in chronological order, and also provided me with a small digital recorder to record the reactions and possible confessions that might arise during the confrontation. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. Uncles, cousins, family friends, all showing curiosity about the reason for the gathering, but being too polite to ask direct questions. My mother arrived punctually at 7:30, wearing an elegant outfit and carrying a bouquet of flowers as if she were going to a celebration instead of her own public trial. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, wearing the blue suit I always complimented, and bringing an expensive bottle of wine, probably purchased with money my mother had given him. Watching them interact naturally with other family members, receiving greetings and displays of affection, made me feel a mixture of sadness and disgust. "In a few minutes, these same people will know the truth about you," I thought, as I watched them play their roles of dedicated son-in-law and loving mother. During dinner, conversation flowed normally, with discussions about work, future plans, and even some jokes about how I was recovering well from the stress of the canceled wedding. My mother and Daniel actively participated in the conversations, even making comments about how they hoped I would find true happiness soon, in a display of hypocrisy that tested all the limits of my self-control. When dessert time came, I slowly rose from my chair and asked for everyone's attention, my voice sounding firm despite the emotional storm happening inside me. "I would like to thank everyone for being here today because you will witness something very important," I began, observing how my mother and Daniel exchanged a nervous look. "You know that I canceled my wedding 2 weeks ago, and many were curious about the reasons. Today I will clarify exactly what happened." The silence in the room became almost palpable, and I could see expressions of expectation and concern on the faces of family members present. I walked to the sound system I had prepared and held the remote control in my hands as if it were a weapon. The reason for the cancellation was discovering that my mother and my fiancé have been having an affair for 8 months, I declared calmly, observing how shock spread across the faces around the table. Some guests audibly gasped, others were left open-mouthed, and I saw my older aunt cross herself instinctively. My mother tried to rise from her chair, her face becoming visibly pale, but I continued speaking before she could protest. "And so, there is no doubt about the truthfulness of my accusation. I have evidence that was collected by a private investigator over the past 10 days. I pressed the button on the remote and the first recording began to play, filling the room with the unmistakable voices of my mother and Daniel, discussing their plans to use me financially after the wedding. The impact was devastating. I saw people covering their mouths in shock, others shaking their heads in disbelief, and my older uncle standing up from his chair with an expression of indignation. Daniel tried to get up to leave, but my father physically stopped him. "You're going to stay here and face what you did," Roberto said with authority. The recording continued relentlessly, exposing every sordid detail of the conspiracy against me, every cruel laugh about my supposed naivety, every plan to manipulate me and abandon me after they got what they wanted. When the first recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sobs of some people who were clearly moved by the cruelty of what they had just heard. My mother was visibly panicking, her hands trembling as she tried to find words to defend herself, but any explanation would be useless in the face of the irrefutable evidence that had just been played. "Isabella, please, let me explain. Things aren't exactly how they seem in that recording," she began with a desperate voice, but I interrupted her immediately. "They aren't how they seem? Then let's listen to the second recording to be absolutely certain," I replied, pressing the remote control again. The second recording was even more devastating because it showed how they had planned to deceive me during the confrontation itself when I discovered them at the motel, discussing in advance the ridiculous story about testing fidelity that they tried to push on me. I heard my mother's voice saying, "If she discovers anything, we'll use the story that I was testing you to protect her. She's too sentimental not to believe a justification that involves maternal love." The calculating coldness with which they had manipulated my maternal feelings made me feel such intense anger that I began to visibly shake. Daniel tried once again to defend himself. "Isabella, I can explain the context of these conversations." But he was interrupted by my cousin's indignant voice. "What context could justify this kind of betrayal? You planned this for months." Other family members began to express their indignation simultaneously, creating a chorus of condemnatory voices that echoed throughout the room. My aunt addressed my mother directly. "Marcia, how could you have done this to your own daughter? How can you sleep at night knowing you destroyed her life?" The public humiliation I had planned was working perfectly, but observing my mother's complete breakdown also caused me unexpected pain, because part of me still loved her despite everything she had done. The following minutes were a whirlwind of accusations, attempts at pathetic justifications, and even more shocking revelations that emerged during the confrontation. My younger cousin, 25 years old, stood up and looked directly at Daniel. "I always thought it was strange how you knew details about Aunt Marcia's routine that not even Isabella knew. Now I understand why." Another revelation came from my uncle, who said he had seen Daniel leaving my mother's house one Sunday morning when I was supposed to be traveling for work, but had kept quiet thinking it was an innocent visit to solve some household problem. Each new piece of information that emerged painted an even clearer picture of how the betrayal had been obvious to outside observers, but carefully hidden from me through systematic lies. Daniel, seeing that there was no possible escape, finally attempted a partial confession. "Isabella, I admit that I made wrong choices, but you need to understand that I really loved you. The situation with your mother happened gradually. It wasn't planned from the beginning." But her words sounded empty and desperate in the face of evidence that proved exactly the opposite. My mother also tried one last strategy of emotional manipulation. "Daughter, regardless of everything that happened, I am still your mother and will always love you. This situation can be overcome if you allow it." I looked into her eyes and responded with a coldness that surprised even myself. "You stopped being my mother the moment you decided to cheat with my fiancé. Mothers protect their daughters. They don't destroy them for sexual pleasure and financial greed." The harshness of my words echoed through the room, and I saw several people nodding in agreement. Fernanda, who had remained silent until that moment, finally spoke. "Marcia and Daniel, you not only betrayed Isabella, but humiliated this entire family with your conduct. There is no possible forgiveness for this kind of cruelty." The confrontation came to an end when I announced that I had consulted a lawyer about possible legal measures I could take against both of them, including lawsuits for moral damages and recovery of the financial values that my mother had invested in Daniel using money that should be my future inheritance. "You have 1 week to decide whether you want to resolve this amicably, or if you prefer to face a public judicial process that will make this situation even more humiliating," I declared, my voice loaded with determination. "I want Daniel to return all the money he received from my mother, both of you to sign a commitment term never to try to contact me again, and to leave my life definitively." Daniel tried to protest about the impossibility of returning the money immediately, but my father interrupted him dryly. "You should have thought about that before accepting to be supported by your fiancé's mother." The meeting ended with my mother and Daniel leaving the house under the condemning gazes of the entire family, their attempts to maintain dignity being completely frustrated by the irrefutable evidence of their actions. After they left, the remaining family members surrounded me with demonstrations of support and affection, many apologizing for not having noticed the signs of betrayal and offering any help I might need. My older uncle summed up the general feeling. "Isabella, you did the right thing by exposing these two. Nobody deserves to be betrayed like this, especially by people who should protect you." The feeling of vindication and justice was intense, but also came accompanied by a deep sadness for the definitive loss of 2 people who had been central in my life for so long. Fernanda stayed with me until late at night, helping me emotionally process everything that had happened and planning the next practical steps to rebuild my life without the toxic presence of those 2 people. 3 months have passed since the public confrontation, and during this period I managed to establish a new and healthy routine that didn't include either my mother or Daniel in any aspect. The legal process I initiated against both resulted in an out-of-court settlement where Daniel agreed to return the almost 50,000 Rs he had received from my mother throughout the 8 months of clandestine relationship, paid in monthly installments deducted directly from his salary. My mother was forced to transfer to me the apartment that was in her name, but had been bought with money from my grandfather's inheritance, ensuring that I recovered at least part of the family assets she had used to finance her betrayal. Both signed restrictive terms that prohibit them from attempting any type of contact with me, under penalty of fine and more severe judicial measures. Their absence from my life was initially painful, especially on weekends and holidays when loneliness became more intense, but I gradually realized that the peace of mind I gained amply compensated for the loss. Fernanda continued to be my main source of emotional support, visiting me regularly and including me in social activities that helped me rebuild my self-esteem and trust in people. I started therapy with Dr. Silva, a psychologist specialized in family trauma, who helped me process not only the specific betrayal I suffered, but also patterns of manipulation that my mother had exercised over me throughout my life. "Isabella, your reaction to the discovery of the betrayal was exemplary," said Dr. Silva during one of our sessions. "Many people in similar situations choose to deny reality or forgive prematurely to avoid the discomfort of confrontation. You chose to face the truth and protect your own dignity." The therapy sessions made me understand that the betrayal I suffered was not an isolated event, but the culmination of a toxic maternal relationship where my mother had always competed with me instead of protecting me. During this period of personal reconstruction, I also focused intensively on my professional career, channeling the emotional energy I previously devoted to the relationship and wedding preparations into challenging architectural projects. I accepted a promotion at the office that gave me more responsibilities and a significantly better salary, allowing me even greater financial independence. I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, decorating it completely with furniture and objects that reflected only my personal taste without influences or contaminated memories from the past. Therapy helped me understand that I had spent years making decisions based on what I thought would make my mother happy or what would keep Daniel interested, instead of following my own desires and needs. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based exclusively on my own well-being and personal happiness, a freedom I found to be simultaneously terrifying and invigorating. I began exploring hobbies I had abandoned during my relationship with Daniel. I returned to painting watercolors on weekends, enrolled in dance classes I always wanted to take but that he considered a waste of time, and even adopted a Persian cat I named Archimedes, a tribute to my profession and to the discovery of truth that changed my life. The healing process wasn't linear or easy. There were days when I missed the familiarity of the old routine, even knowing it was based on lies, and nights when I cried over the loss of the future I had imagined. But gradually, these moments of sadness were replaced by a growing sense of personal strength and self-knowledge that I had never experienced before. 6 months after the confrontation, I received information through mutual acquaintances that my mother and Daniel had ended their relationship turbulently, apparently because he had tried to pull the same kind of financial scam on her that they had planned for me. The irony of the situation brought me bitter satisfaction. They had discovered firsthand that people capable of betraying once are capable of betraying always. My mother had lost not only her daughter, but also the man for whom she had sacrificed our relationship, ending up alone with a destroyed reputation and some relatives who still maintained contact with her only out of pity. Daniel had moved to another city to escape the social shame and debts he had accumulated. But his professional reputation was ruined because the story of the betrayal had spread through the architecture and engineering circles where we both worked. Fernanda told me these details with some hesitation, fearing that the information might awaken feelings of pity or desire to forgive, but I discovered that I felt only indifference toward both of them. They made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences. I responded calmly when she finished sharing the latest news. I feel neither pity nor special satisfaction about their situation. I simply don't care anymore about what happens in their lives. This emotional indifference was perhaps the greatest proof that I had truly overcome the betrayal and moved on, because it meant they no longer had the power to cause me pain or joy through their actions. During therapy, Dr. Silva explained that this indifference was a healthy sign of emotional detachment and personal growth. When we can look at people who hurt us without feeling anger or pity, it means we've reclaimed our personal power and inner peace, she said in a particularly productive session. You're no longer defining your happiness in relation to their actions, but building a life based on your own values and goals. Approximately 1 year after discovering the betrayal, I began to feel genuinely ready to consider new romantic relationships, something that had seemed impossible during the first months of recovery. I met Pedro, a 36-year-old history teacher, at an art exhibition that Fernanda convinced me to visit on a Saturday afternoon. Pedro was completely different from Daniel. Where my ex-fiancé was vain and materialistic, Pedro demonstrated genuine humility and sincere interest in art, literature, and social issues. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, flowing naturally between diverse topics without the anxiety or need to impress that characterized my previous encounters. He made me laugh with funny stories about his teenage students, demonstrated deep knowledge about historical architecture that complemented my background, and most importantly, listened to me with genuine attention when I talked about my passion for restoring old buildings. During our first meetings, I was completely honest about my recent experience with betrayal, explaining that I was still in the process of emotional reconstruction and that I needed time and patience to trust again. Pedro received this information with maturity and understanding that positively surprised me. "Isabella, we all have stories and emotional scars," he said during our third conversation. "The important thing is that you're being honest about where you are emotionally, and I completely respect your pace and your needs." The difference in the quality of communication compared to my previous relationship was striking, where Daniel frequently made me feel guilty for expressing concerns or needs. Pedro encouraged open conversations and emotional honesty. Our relationship evolved slowly and organically, based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, instead of intense passion or social pressure to find someone. A year and a half after the betrayal that changed my life, I can say with certainty that I've become a stronger, wiser, and happier person than I was before discovering the truth about my mother and Daniel. The initial pain of discovery was devastating, but it forced me to examine toxic patterns in my relationships that I had accepted as normal throughout my adult life. I learned to establish clear boundaries, to trust my intuition when something seems wrong, and most importantly, to value my own peace of mind above the expectations or approval of other people. Therapy taught me that people willing to betray us in such a calculated and cruel way never really loved us the way they pretended to, and that losing relationships based on lies is actually a disguised gain. Pedro and I are building something genuine and healthy, based on honesty, respect, and compatible life goals, without rush or pressure to reach artificial milestones like marriage or children within specific timeframes. My professional career has flourished impressively since I stopped dividing my emotional energy between work and a relationship based on falsehood, and I was recently promoted to Special Projects Coordinator at the firm where I work. The absence of my mother from my life, although initially painful, proved to be a liberation from decades of subtle manipulation and competition disguised as maternal love. I established deeper and more meaningful relationships with other family members who truly support and value me, especially with my father, who has become an even more important and stabilizing presence. Fernanda remains my best friend and confidant, and our friendship has strengthened enormously through this difficult experience that she helped me navigate with wisdom and unquestionable loyalty. The most important lesson I learned during this period of reconstruction is that our happiness and self-esteem cannot depend on the approval or presence of people who don't genuinely respect us. As painful as it is to discover that people we love are capable of betraying us so cruelly, this discovery is also an opportunity to eliminate toxic relationships and build a life based on authenticity and solid values. Today, when I look back and remember that rainy afternoon when I saw my mother leaving the motel with my fiancé, I feel gratitude for having discovered the truth before getting married and potentially wasting decades of my life in a farce. The pain of betrayal was intense but temporary, while the freedom and personal growth I gained are permanent and transformative. I learned that protecting our own dignity and well-being is not selfishness, but a basic necessity for a full and meaningful life. People who truly love us don't betray us, don't systematically lie to us, and don't conspire to use us for their own benefit. When we discover that someone is capable of such cruelty, our only healthy option is to remove them completely from our lives, regardless of blood ties or shared history. Forgiveness may be important for our own inner peace, but it doesn't need to include reconciliation or continued presence of these people in our life. I can forgive my mother and Daniel for the betrayal they committed, but I don't need to have relationships with them to move forward in a healthy way. In fact, maintaining distance is the wisest and most protective choice I can make for myself. The life I've built after eliminating toxic people is more peaceful, authentic, and satisfying than anything I had before, proving that sometimes the greatest losses transform into the greatest blessings when we have the courage to face the truth and act in our own benefit. Did you like Isabella's story? Then subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you right here on screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.